Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, November 28th, 2019, my sister Leah leaned against the kitchen island and smirked. "Pretty is your only currency." Riley. By day 10, Sunday, December 8th, I had lost my robotics captaincy and was one signature away from burning the $600 I had saved from my summer job. I am Riley, 17, and they believed their plan had buried me. If family greed has ever blindsided you, drop your city in the comments, because I want to know where you were when you realized love could be used like a crowbar. Subscribe to see the switch flip, because the quiet revenge arrives when the noise fades. Remember this line because it will matter later. Favoritism is just theft with better lighting. 10 days. That is all it took. North Austin looks ordinary if you only see the surface. The lawns in our cul-de-sac are trimmed into compliant shapes, the mailboxes stand like obedient soldiers, and every porch has its decorative sign about blessings and home, the kind that tries too hard to convince strangers that we are gentle people. Inside our house, the air always smelled faintly like hairspray and citrus cleaner. My mother kept 5 kinds of mustard in the fridge because perfection needs options, and my father had a habit of calling from the hallway, chin up, shoulders back, as if posture could pass for character. I was the inconvenient daughter, the tomboy with oil under her nails, the one who assembled gears for fun and saw beauty in torque and tolerance rather than in winged eyeliner. Leah, 8 months older and a year ahead in school, was the family's crown jewel. She moved through rooms like a homecoming queen, crossing a stage that was designed for her stride. My mother loved to say we did not raise you to be average, but what she meant was we did not raise you to be you. In our house, appearances were not just a preference, they were policy. At 13, I learned that homework was a privilege that could be revoked if I refused mascara. At 14, I learned that a weight loss protein bar could be a breakfast, lunch, and lesson. At 15, my mother made a joke in front of the cousins that I still looked 12 in a way that made everyone laugh and me disappear. We were not religious, at least not in the traditional way. Beauty was the god, admiration was the tithe, and Leah was the high priestess. If I complied, there were prizes. A promise of a trip to Disney if I behaved like a lady, a Sephora haul if I lost a few pounds. Love rebranded as loyalty points. It was never spoken as a threat, but it felt like standing on a balcony with no railing. I did what quiet children do. I adapted my survival into rituals. Every morning before school, I tightened the laces on my worn sneakers and pretended they were armor. I carried a small notebook where I wrote down times and observations, not because I suspected what was coming yet, but because clarity was the only power I owned. After classes, I worked shifts at a neighborhood grocery store bagging produce for people who called me sweetheart and never looked at my name tag. I saved every tip. I counted the crumpled bills and smoothed them on my desk like I was ironing my future. By Thanksgiving that year, I had saved $600, a small fortune, to a girl who wanted a new controller for the robotics team, a set of precision screwdrivers, and the right to pursue something no one understood. Our school was the kind you see in television shows about suburbs that look safer than they are. There was a counselor who cycled through gentle phrases about resilience and gratitude. There was a school resource officer who attended assemblies about cyberbullying and substance abuse, whose presence was a reminder that even nice neighborhoods have rules with badges. The principal, Mr. Jacobson, had the patient face of a man who believed paper trails and meetings could tame human chaos. My world was a grid of classrooms, the clatter of lockers, the dusty, sweet smell of the robotics lab, and the hum of fluorescent lights that made everything look a little too clean. Leah lived in a parallel version of that world. She spoke fluent popularity. Her friends had synchronized outfits and synchronized opinions. She curated her life the way influencers curate feeds, all golden hour and white teeth. At home, she floated through our mother's orbit like a favored planet, while I tried not to collide with debris. It was not that I hated her. Hate is noisy. What I felt was a heavy ache, the kind you get when you realize you have been cast as the cautionary tale in someone else's success story. Still, I believed if I worked hard enough, if I made my own small kingdom of gears and code and quiet competence, I could coexist with her empire of gloss. Thanksgiving should have been a pause in the war. The kitchen steamed with butter and cinnamon. The television murmured about a parade. My father carved the turkey like a surgeon performing a ritual. My mother moved through the house with a floral apron and the urgency of a director staging a performance. Leah arrived late, hair glazed with shine, a sweater that looked expensive because it was meant to. She kissed the air near my cheek and said the sentence that would become a thread I would pull for months. "Pretty is your only currency, Riley." The words were casual and cruel, in the way of people who know you cannot fight what you cannot define. I laughed. Not the happy kind. The laugh you make when a blade grazes rather than cuts. I rinsed a bowl and watched the water spiral down. I said nothing because I had learned that people who speak to provoke are most afraid of silence that holds. Leah rolled her eyes like a queen dismissing a peasant. My mother pretended she had not heard because denial was our family's favorite spice. My father poured himself more wine and told a story about the market, about someone else's mishap. The room went on being itself, but I felt the smallest shift, like the moment a plane dips and then steadies, and you realize the pilot had to fight something invisible. I returned to my room after the dishes were done. On the wall near the front door, the Ring brand doorbell camera glowed its faint blue ring. Security disguised as courtesy. In the quiet of my room, I wrote the date, the time, and the sentence in my notebook. I did not know why. It felt like saving a receipt for a meal you did not enjoy just in case you needed proof it had happened. I counted my money, all that careful saving, and pictured the controller I would buy the competition. I would lead the small, unglamorous joy of being good at something no one could take from me. Then I slept. The house exhaled, the neighborhood lights dimmed. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing, and a car rolled past like a low tide of wheels. This is the part I did not understand then, and you need to hold on to it, for later the night does not erase anything. It only develops it like film submerged in solution, pulling a picture from the dark. And on a different night soon after, when the blue ring blinked at 3 a.m, the countdown began. The night the blue ring lit up the neighborhood was a glass of water trembling on a table you could not see. Someone had bumped. I woke to that faint chime, a polite doorbell tone trying to make trespass sound like a favor. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. 3 a.m, the screen said, and then more precisely 3:03 in the morning front door. I lay very still, listening. The house made its old bones noises, the heater clicking, the refrigerator humming, the faraway note of a car taking a curve. Then I heard the sound that does not belong inside a home at that hour, gravel crunching under quick feet like someone running on their toes. I sat up, pulled on a hoodie, and stepped into the hallway. By the time I reached the front door, the chime sounded again, a second invitation from a stranger or a mistake. The air smelled like cold and wet leaves. The porch light poured a yellow cone onto the welcome mat. The world offered me nothing to fear, and yet fear arrived with its own agenda. I cracked the door and looked out. There was no one. But the moment the door moved, something tugged against my ankle fast and unseen. The welcome mat slipped, a thin cord snapped free from where it had been pinned beneath the mat's corner and looped across to the railing. For a heartbeat, I did not understand the geometry of what I had stepped into. Then I heard the hard clatter above a small object tipping off the top of the porch column where holiday garland curled like a green snake. A mason jar fell. It broke into clean, glittering triangles, and liquid sloshed my forearm and the side of my neck. At first, there was only the shock of cold. Then the burn arrived, bright and absolute, turning my skin into a lit match. I screamed without sound, the kind of scream that collapses inward. I stumbled back, slammed the door with the heel of my hand, and ran for the kitchen sink. Water, 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 the mind repeats, when it is reduced to a single purpose. I shoved my arm under the faucet, cranked it cold, and watched the clear stream sizzle against a pane that has no mercy. The smell climbed into my head, sharp and industrial, a chemistry lab memory bent into nightmare. My neck prickled like a swarm of hornets. I could hear footsteps now, another set not running away but appearing from behind me. My mother, then, my father, then Leah, in her satin robe hair, perfect in the way of people who always know where the light will catch them. "What did you do?" my mother cried, as if the universe had seen me and decided I owed it an apology. I opened the door. I said each word, a small stone I laid on the floor between us. My father flicked on every light. Leah covered her mouth with one hand and gripped the banister with the other, a portrait of concern. The skin on my forearm blushed into a mottled red with an angry border. My neck was worse, a blotchy map. "We need the emergency room," my father said, and for once his voice did not sound like a memo about improvement. It sounded like a man who had located the priority. My mother wrapped a clean towel around my shoulders and pulled me through the house as if speed could outpace pain. I glanced at the front door as we passed. On the floor near the threshold, a slip of fishing line coiled like a shed snakeskin. Above on the column, a square of tape glinted where the jar had rested. The Ring doorbell's camera still held its quiet blue halo, a small moon that had watched everything. St. David's is always colder at night. The triage nurse asked the questions that make you re-enter your body name age allergies. 17, I said. None, I said. The nurse looked at the burns and nodded with the calm of someone who has cataloged pain and found it survivable. The doctor rinsed and dabbed and explained in a tone that tried to braid comfort into instruction. Chemical exposure likely acidic. Superficial burns here, deeper irritation there. Monitor for blistering. Keep it clean. Hydrate. There will be tenderness. There may be scars. He gave my mother papers, and he gave me the kind of eye contact adults reserve for teenagers who appear to be the only honest narrators in the room. "Do you know what happened?" he asked quietly. "A jar fell," I said. "Someone made it fall. He did not press. He wrote a note." I watched the pen move and felt bizarrely respected. We drove home close to dawn, a time of day that belongs to people who have fled something or people who are about to chase it. My arm throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The seatbelt rubbed my neck and turned a steady ache into an argument. When we stepped back into the house, the smell of cleaner fought the chemical tang still caught in the air, as if scents themselves were debating blame. My father swept the porch while my mother rewrapped my bandage with a gentleness that almost erased the years I had felt like a project rather than a person. Leah hovered, offering tea, offering to call someone, offering a tone of concern that had the exact same cadence as her mockery. "Who would do this?" she whispered. "This is insane." I watched her eyes when she thought no one else was watching. There is a flicker some people cannot hide when they test how close they can stand to a fire without being named the arsonist. For a few days, the house shifted. My mother fussed over me, brought me aloe and cream, gave me permission to skip mascara because suddenly mascara was not the lesson. My father checked the front door twice. Each night, jiggled the lock like a man promising. Leah kept her distance, then brought flowers, then brought an apology shaped like a confession about how popularity is exhausting. Favoritism bent in my direction like a spotlight that burned as much as it warmed. I did not trust it. Mercy in our home had always been transactional and brief. Still, I slept with the kind of exhaustion you get after an accident, a body-mind truce. The morning after the bandages stopped sticking, I sat at the kitchen table with the patient portal open on my laptop. I downloaded the visit summary, the care instructions, the timestamp, the doctor's name, the nurse's initial. I took photos of my arm and neck under the same light from the same angle day after day. I added the images to a folder labeled with a neutral word that meant everything to me and nothing to anyone else. Then I opened the Ring app. Motion alert 3:03 in the morning, another 3:04 in the morning, a third 3:05 in the morning. The footage showed the porch empty, then a shadow slipping along the rail, then the faintest movement of the garland as if a hand had just let go of it. The camera did not capture a face, but it captured time and time his character in disguise. You need to hear this part the way I lived it. I did not vow revenge. I vowed record-keeping. Quiet is a form of power if you pair it with proof. The doorbell camera had given me a beginning. The burns had given everyone else a reason to pretend they were on my side. Both gifts were temporary, but they were enough to start a ledger. I wrote the date, the time, the details, the behavior. I did not know yet who had tied the cord, who had balanced the jar, who had decided that pain could be a shortcut to control. I knew only this: the person who did it believed I would forget the shape of the night, and I never forget shapes. What none of us understood yet was that in trying to scorch me into silence, they had left fingerprints on the air. I would learn how to read them, and when I did, the countdown would not save them. It would count them. By the following week, the house had returned to its preferred temperature of denial, but the air around me felt electrically charged, like the moment before a storm decides if it will simply threaten or arrive. My burns were healing into pink borders that looked like countries on a map no one planned to visit. Leah began to occupy the kitchen again, humming along to carefully chosen pop songs, performing normal like a magician palms a coin. I kept my promise to myself. I did not announce revenge. I sharpened observation. I logged the ordinary because in my family, the ordinary was always the smokescreen for the next catastrophe. Then the catastrophe did not wait for home. It found me at school where the hallways carry gossip, the way rivers carry silt, depositing it into every shallow mind until the water turns the same color as the lie. It was a Monday, which is to say it was a day already committed to disappointment when I opened my locker and smelled something wrong. A wet country smell that does not belong to a building with tile floors and motivational posters. A small plastic container sat near my physics binder. Inside, wrapped in damp paper towel, lay a dead frog. Its limbs stiffened into a final shrug, its mouth open in an accusation I could not argue with. Taped to the inside door were printed screenshots of my social media captions, rewritten to sound thirsty and mean, comments that looked like I had left them under other girls' photos, rating their bodies like produce. A few were real, but old and harmless, twisted out of context. Most were fabrications in the same sandpaper tone, bitter and desperate. Whoever did it knew the shape of my voice well enough to counterfeit it. That kind of mimicry is intimate. I stood still and let the stink settle into my hair as students filed past laughing too loudly at something else, and then not laughing at all when they saw the display. Mr. Jacobson asked to see me before fourth period. He was careful with his words in the way people are when they do not want to be accused of taking a side. He said there had been complaints that several students reported getting messages from my account over the weekend that were inappropriate, that a teacher had forwarded an email from my school address containing a selfie and a line of text that could ruin a life if taken as earnest. He said my locker incident would be investigated, that the school resource officer would write a report, that there was a process. He used the word process like a saint uses the word prayer. I nodded because I knew the choreography. He handed me a temporary suspension notice pending review. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if shame had weight measured in ounces. I signed to acknowledge receipt, not guilt. Then I asked for copies, one for the counselor, one for me. That is important. People think silence is passivity. Silence with paperwork is strategy. When I found Logan, who used to rest his skateboard against the wall and grin like the world owed him exactly one favor, and he had already claimed it, he could not meet my eyes. "You texted me," he said, voice low, "from your handle after midnight. You said I should come over. You sent a picture. I tasted metal. I did not." The words came out clean and cold. He exhaled through his nose, skeptical, wounded, a boy deciding if he should be a man or a mob. "It was you," he said, softer now, like maybe he wanted to be wrong. "It had your exact phrasing." There it was again, intimacy used as ammunition. I told him I would show him something later that mattered more than anything he thought he knew right now. I watched the relief and confusion fight on his face. "I will tell that part after this," I said. "But for now, do not answer anything that pretends to be me." I went home early with the suspension letter folded into my pocket like a warrant. My mother met me at the door with a tight smile I recognized from when relatives visited, the face that says we do not air our mess where anyone might smell it. "What did you do?" she asked, the family's favorite slogan. I told her about the frog, the prince, the messages, the email to the teacher. I used the teacher's name because details anchor truth. My mother blanched the way people blanch when the story threatens to escape the house and rent an apartment of its own in the neighborhood's imagination. "We will handle this," she said, which usually meant we will handle you. I said gently, "No. We will document this." Then I asked for the family laptop. I scrolled the browser history and watched the breadcrumbs appear like constellations a patient astronomer can finally name. The timestamps clung to the edges of the weekend like frost. Social media logins at hours. I was not awake, or I was awake, but not at that device. Drafts created and deleted. A cached image that matched the selfie the teacher received, but cropped in a way I never crop. I took screenshots. I opened the email client and checked the sent folder. Gone, of course, but not untraceable. I navigated to the account's security page and saw the recent activity dates and times and devices and locations that thought they were anonymous because they were not accompanied by a face. I photographed everything each screen against the background of my notebook so that no one could claim the images were faked. I recorded the Ring doorbell logs again, pinning weekend departures and arrivals to the minute. 3 departures between midnight and sunrise on Saturday. 2 more on Sunday. No faces still, but time signatures like fingerprints left in fog. Madison called me as I was compiling. Her voice was a steady hand on a shaking table. She had once been the target of Leah's rumor exercises back when Leah learned that words could make a person disappear socially without ever raising a hand. "I believe you," Madison said, not because she was naive, but because she had learned the difference between performance and pattern. "Bring everything tomorrow. If they will not listen, we will make listening the only comfortable option they have." She paused. "Also, check your recycle bin on the computer. People forget that what they throw away keeps a forwarding address." I checked. There it was, a half-deleted folder with draft images, a list of contacts, a handful of copied phrases that looked like templates for humiliation. It read like a playbook written in my stolen voice. That is when the shape of the plan flashed long enough for me to see its skeleton. The same hands that arranged the frog and taped the printouts were borrowing my name, my tone, my access. The same person who learned my timing and habits had learned my passwords once, or guessed them once, or watched them once, and decided owning my reflection was easier than owning their failure. Here is the truth that will matter later. I did not change my face, or my voice, or my desires. I changed my procedures. I reset every password using a phrase only I would remember, something so personal it would sound random to anyone else. I wrote the new logins in my notebook, which no one else touched. I closed the laptop. I looked at the blue ring on the wall. It looked back like a small, patient witness. People forget that cameras do not only record faces, they record schedules. Schedules tell stories, and stories, once arranged with care, become exhibits. I did not go to war. I went to work. Quiet revenge is a discipline, a daily practice of choosing evidence over adrenaline. The day after the frog and the suspension notice, I met Eric in the robotics lab where the air always smells like hot plastic and patient ambition. He looked at my bandage, then at my face, and said nothing dramatic, which is why I trusted him. "We build the timeline," he said, pushing his glasses up with the back of his wrist as if he were afraid fingerprints themselves could contaminate the truth. "We do it clean." Madison joined us with a thermos of tea and that unblinking, calm survivors develop. We sat at a back table under a humming light that made us all look a little too honest. "You are not crazy," she said simply. "You are cornered. Those are different." I laughed, a small sound that felt like letting out a breath held since Thanksgiving. "Then we corner the problem," I answered, and the plan began to assemble itself the way a robot does, piece by piece, until it moves. First, we created a ledger that would outlive any argument. I wrote the dates, the times, the incidents, and the names of anyone present. I stapled copies of the hospital visit summary to the first page, the ink still crisp with St. David's letterhead, the doctor's signature like a small oath. I slid the temporary suspension notice in next, along with a typed request for a meeting with the counselor and the principal and the school resource officer. Eric placed an old external drive he had wiped clean on the table. "For your files," he said, "never store the only copy on the machine you are trying to prove is compromised." He sounded like a documentary. I needed that tone. We connected the drive labeled a folder with the date spelled out in longhand so no one could argue with the numerals, and copied the Ring doorbell logs and the screenshots of browser history and the photos of my injuries taken with the same lighting, same angle, same quiet rage. There is a legal shadow that stretches over any kind of monitoring, and we walked it like a balance beam. The family laptop did not belong solely to Leah. It was the communal machine my parents bought for shared schoolwork, parked on the desk in the upstairs landing like a piece of furniture. After the burn, my mother was a little softer around the edges, still controlling, but the kind of controlling that pretends to be care. I asked her in the kitchen, where truth sometimes gets a pass, because the sink is running, if I could enable the operating system's own activity logging and screen recording for my safety while I was trying to clear my name. I used those exact words. She hesitated, looking past me at the ring chime, as if it were a reasonable person's opinion. Finally, she nodded, not out of trust in me, but out of fear that the neighborhood might hear a different story than the one she curates. I wrote a one-line note, parental consent for temporary monitoring on the shared computer for safety, and review of alleged cyberbullying, dated it in full words, and asked her to initial it. She did, distracted by a timer going off in the oven. It was not a contract. It was not ironclad, but it was something with ink. Eric showed me how to turn on built-in accessibility features that leave quiet footprints a screen reader log, that notes window focus, changes a simple screen recording that captures keystrokes as shadows without storing the actual letters, a system log that lists logins and logouts like a polite doorman. No hacking, no installing anything that would get us laughed out of a hearing. "You are not trying to outsmart a genius," he said. "You are trying to outlast a performance." Madison insisted on chain of custody, a phrase I had heard on crime shows and never expected to use in a house that smells like citrus cleaner. We bought a cheap pack of manila envelopes for under $10 and a small roll of brown tape for under $3 from the school supply aisle on my way home. I wrote the date on each envelope, sealed copies of the files inside, and signed the flap across the tape. Every time we updated, we made a duplicate and placed it in Madison's backpack. It felt theatrical. It was also, I suspected, the only language administrators fully respect. Then we baited the stage. On the shared desktop, I created folders I knew Leah would not resist: counselor notes draft letter to principal scholarship essay robotics budget. Inside each, I placed decoy documents with bland titles and the kind of first lines that invite a thief to keep reading. The screen recorder would mark when the windows opened, when text was highlighted, when something was dragged to the trash and then reconsidered. I set the computer to require no password wake for the next day, leaving it asleep, but unlocked the digital equivalent of a door left on the latch. The ethics of bait make some people uncomfortable, but people forget that wrongdoing is not invented by a decoy. It is invited out of the shadows it already lives in. At dinner, Leah performed contrition with a softness that would have convinced a jury. "I feel awful about what is happening to you," she said. Eyes shiny, voice low enough to make my father lean in with paternal sympathy. "High school is brutal for girls like us. Girls like us." The phrase did that thing where your heart laughs but your mouth refuses. I put my fork down and let the silence pull a thread from her monologue. She looked to our mother, who nodded, which was as close to applause as the dining room offered. "Thank you," I said, tone flat, as if someone had complimented the weather and I had no investment in the sun. Leah bit the inside of her cheek and smiled anyway. "If you need help with your counselor letter, I can read it," she added. I met her eyes and filed the sentence under useful later. That night I cleaned my room the way you clear a runway. I tucked wires and chargers away. I placed my notebook under the pillow, not because I was afraid someone would find it, but because I wanted to sleep with proof close to my spine. I set 2 alarms, one on my phone, one on an old kitchen timer I borrowed to wake me before dawn. Then I lay in the dark and memorized the floorboard that squeaks the way the hall light cuts under my door when someone walks by, the precise tone of the refrigerator cycling, in case the sound changes and the change means something. I am telling you this because the next part requires you to understand that preparation is not dramatic. It is dull, repetitive, holy. Quiet revenge is not a plot twist. It is a slow exhale that outlasts a scream. Around midnight, Madison texted a single line, "Remember to breathe, but not loud." Eric followed with, "If nothing happens, that is also data." I put the phone face down and closed my eyes. Somewhere between wake and sleep, I saw the blue ring of the doorbell hovering in my mind like a coin under a streetlight that no one has noticed yet. In a few hours, that coin would buy me something I could never have purchased with pretty or popularity. It would buy me the moment when performance meets proof and runs out of lines. But I will tell that part after this. For now, remember, the folders had been named, the recorder armed, the parental initial dried on the page, and the house had settled into the quiet that bad plans mistake for safety. The morning after we armed the decoys, the school resource officer called me in. A custodian had found a small zipper pouch in my locker with a handful of pills that did not look like anything a doctor would prescribe to a teenager. The report was typed and tidy, the kind of document adults believe more than tears. Temporary suspension extended. The principal mentioned Harmony Ridge Academy as an option if disruption continues. I asked for copies of every page, spelled my name slowly for the record, and signed to acknowledge receipt, not admission. At home, my mother said the sentence that shrinks daughters into shapes that suit parents: "If you behaved like a lady, this would not happen." I breathed once, then answered, calm as a winter lake, "If we behave like a family, we will keep records." I photographed the pouch before the officer sealed it, noted the chain of custody, and wrote the time in my notebook. That evening, the shared computer woke as if nudged by a ghost. The screen recorder marked a hand-opening counselor notes highlighting paragraphs, copying a line I had planted. I know who is using my accounts. A second window flickered my email draft to the principal, a decoy I had titled Robotics Budget. The cursor hovered over the trash icon, then dragged the file in and hesitated as if conscience had arthritis. I did not cheer. Quiet revenge is not about victory laps. It is about leaving footprints where someone insists they float. 2 days later, Eric's alert pinged at lunchtime. He had enabled the operating system's audit logs and turned on each platform's built-in security notifications to forward new login alerts to both our inboxes using my mother's initialed consent on the shared computer. A login to my social media from the shared machine appeared, followed by a burst of activity that looked like a performance trying to become a crime. Madison and I walked the long hallway behind the theater where lockers rattle, but people rarely pass. I slid a little notebook into the bottom of my open locker, a blank book with one sentence written 100 times, "I know what you are doing." Then I stepped away and counted to 60. Leah appeared like a reflection that decided to go first. She moved quickly as if the world owed her clearance. She pulled the book, flipped, smirked, and tucked it into her bag. Reward claimed. Then she took out her phone, opened my handle, and began typing to Logan, inviting him to meet, copying a line she had used before. Madison filmed from my right, framing the screen, the fingers, the face, the rotating school logo on the lanyard she wore. I filmed from my left, catching the notification banner that showed the same message arriving on my phone at the same second. We captured the keystroke cadence, the way she bites the inside of her cheek when she is proud of a lie, the little laugh she makes when she believes no one is watching. I felt nothing triumphant, only a deep, quiet click as the pieces found their shape. "This is very important," I whispered into the mic I had pinned under my hoodie. "We are not humiliating her. We are recording a pattern." That night, our living room became a small courtroom with bad lighting. Per campus policy, the school resource officer had already provided the principal with timestamp logs and limited stills from the corridor cameras specifically for this meeting. We were allowed to reference the times in discussion, but not to copy or distribute the images. Madison's mother, Mrs. Chen, sat forward on the couch, hands calm, voice steady with the authority of someone who has spent years turning chaos into logs. She explained to my parents step by step what the system records without drama window focus changes, recent login times where the router saw devices, what the Ring doorbell marked between midnight and dawn. She did not accuse. She aligned timestamps like stars in a simple constellation anyone could see. I placed the manila envelopes on the coffee table, each dated in longhand, each flap signed across brown tape. I played the hallway clip once, then again without sound. My father stared at the floor. My mother blinked fast as if tears could blur a ledger. Leah tried a tremble in her voice, then tried anger, then tilted her chin and said, "She is obsessed with me." Mrs. Chen smiled the way a surgeon does before naming the organ. "Here," she said softly, pointing, "is your daughter logging into the victim's account at exactly the time the Ring camera shows her leaving and returning. Here are the fabricated emails. Here is the draft of the counselor letter she opened and altered. Here is the planted medicine in the locker that coincides with her route on the corridor cameras." My mother whispered, "We taught the wrong lesson." Leah lifted her shoulders like a queen under siege. "Pretty is power," she said to me in a voice too low for anyone else. "You will never have it." I set the clip playing one more time and did not answer. Truth does not argue. It arrives with a timestamp. At the disciplinary hearing, the conference room smelled like coffee and carpet glue. Mr. Jacobson read the incident report in a slow voice that respects paperwork. The school resource officer summarized his findings. When it was my turn, I did not perform pain. I placed facts in a line, the doctor's notes from St. David's, the photographs taken daily under identical light, the ring logs with times spelled out, the screen recordings of decoy files opened, altered, and deleted, the hallway video capturing device face and message banner in a single frame, the recycle bin folder with templates for humiliation, the chain of custody signatures. I slid copies to the counselor and to the officer. Logan arrived with eyes that could not look up and a sentence I did not know I needed: "I am sorry. I was wrong." Leah began to cry in a way that demanded an audience, claiming I forged the footage. Mrs. Chen described how metadata resists wishful thinking. The room shifted. The principal cleared my suspension, reinstated my captaincy on the robotics team, and entered a finding of cyberbullying and conduct violation against Leah. There were no cheers. The quiet was the sound of a verdict occupying a chair. As we left, Leah hissed, "You will regret this." I met her gaze and let the silence hold. It is difficult to threaten someone who has learned to breathe underwater. Quiet revenge does not end at a closed door. It seeps into places performances like to stand. I wrote a measured update to the robotics club, to the small community sponsor who had promised a discount on parts to the counselor. No gory details, only gratitude that the process worked with relevant documents attached. I reallocated $600 of my saved money for a controller and a set of precision tools, and I logged the purchase with the care of a person recording a promise kept to her younger self. Madison helped me file a formal report under the school's harassment and bullying policy citing the digital evidence. I did not post, I did not gloat, but consequences are social creatures. The local cosmetics store withdrew Leah's summer internship citing violations of their student code. A student committee rescinded an influencer program she was courting. Her group chat became a room with fewer chairs. I did not take a victory lap. I went to the lab, soldered a joint until it cooled, and let competence be the only notice I accepted. I will tell the next part after this, I promised my future self. For now, build. The backlash arrived the way waves do, rhythmic and indifferent. Leah's phone lit with calls. She did not want to answer messages from friends who needed distance to save themselves an email from the vice principal about campus service hours and restorative meetings. She tried to pivot the narrative, accusing me of weaponizing paperwork. It is hard to smear someone who has refused to say much. At dinner, she said, "You ruined my life over nothing." My father put down his fork and for the first time did not look away. "You did this," he said, not loudly. The house tilted on that sentence. In her room, Leah slammed a drawer. In mine, I checked that every file had a twin stored off-site and breathed like a runner at the line. The next morning, through the vice principal's office, the school resource officer returned the pouch to my parents with a written note. The contents tested as over-the-counter caffeine supplements, not controlled substances. The chain of custody form carried the officer's signature and the exact time of release. I watched the correction settle a small weight placed on the right scale. Therapy began with the awkwardness of people who have practiced being fine for too long. Dr. Patel's office held the soft chairs of a place that forgives. We read a family contract out loud with clauses that sound simple. Until you try to live them, no access to each other's accounts, no commentary on bodies, no punishment by silence, no performance in place of apology. Leah rolled her eyes, then rolled them less. My mother cried once and did not try to turn the tears into a new stage. My father admitted he had confused achievement with love. "Peace is expensive," I said quietly. I paid in evidence. On a weekend, we rented a small cabin by a lake with no internet where geese argued with the morning, and the only notifications were wind and weather. We cooked badly. We walked. We said little. In the quiet, my anger cooled into boundaries. That is the difference between closure and victory. Victory wants an audience. Closure only wants air. I went back to school on a Monday that smelled like cut grass and second chances. The robotics lab welcomed me with the hum I had missed. Logan offered a hand to steady a sensor and a sentence I believed "I will listen first, next time." Madison squeezed my shoulder at meetings the way people do when they know the cost of truth. Eric labeled a cable for Riley's future and grinned. At home, the Ring doorbell blinked its calm blue ring, an eye that had witnessed and waited. I kept all the files not as ammunition, but as a museum of a season I survived. When I finally spoke to the camera for my channel, I did not show the worst moments. I offered what I wished someone had given me: how to record, how to breathe, how to turn panic into paper. If you are hearing me in Tulsa or Tampa or Tacoma, I said protect your passwords and your peace. Pretty is not currency. Character is. And receipts are not petty. They are history. They thought beauty would buy silence. I kept the receipts. 10 days. That is all it took to lose and to regain what mattered. Quiet revenge did not destroy anyone. It rebuilt me.